Morgan Sjogren, welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
Thanks for having me.
You wrote in a piece entitled At Home in the Desert that nature is not a playground to you, it's your home. And something that your friend Steve Allen told you once is this is not backpacking, we are living in the desert. What does all this mean to you?
Oh, the Pandora's box. I mean, I, up front, it means literally what it says that there is no other home. The earth we live in, nature, and for me, that's the desert is home, and that's the primary place to care for. It's the primary place to go to when I need shelter or refuge, and it's also my community, both the humans and the plants and animals and landscapes that I share the space with.
Which specific desert are we talking about?
That's a good question. Specifically right now, the Colorado Plateau, Utah's Canyon Country, Northern Arizona, the heart of Colorado River country, these areas of sinuous sandstone canyons carved by the Colorado River. But it also extends out to the Mojave Desert where I grew up, the Great Basin Desert where I spent some of my 20s, and the Sonoran Desert where I often go in winter.
So this is the greater Great Basin area encompassing maybe 5 different states, and it's pretty
Mhm.
unpopulated. And when I look at like your Instagram, for example, there's a lot of you being out in beautiful sandstone, and it's just empty. It's just you, maybe your partner Aaron, and it's beautiful, but it's also very empty. And I'm curious how much of your life is really spent in this direct relationship with nature, and how much of it is actually more city life, more social. Yeah, what's the ratio for you? How much of your time are you really out there in nature, or is it just in small bursts?
That's always something that's ebbing and flowing, but I will say that time in actual cities probably constitutes less than 1 to 3% of my entire year. And that's usually by necessity, either to visit family or for a work or speaking related event. I currently reside in a very small town, one of the most rural towns in the continental United States. And I can leave the small house that I'm currently renting and be surrounded by millions of acres of wilderness and public land where there's very few people. And so I would say, the opportunities for solitude and communing with the natural world are the major part of every day. And then there are times where I'm spending more time at home writing and getting work done and in this small community and nurturing those relationships. And then there are times where I'm out and people don't see me for weeks at a time.
And when you're out, what are you doing? How do you spend your time? I'm sure it's season dependent, but maybe just an average of your past few years of being in the desert. How are you actually spending that time?
And this is where it really, comes back to that concept of living in the desert, because there's not just one way that I experience being out, just like you wouldn't spend your time at home doing just one thing. And so there are periods where I've spent, 40 days out backpacking while working on a project like my last book, Path of Light. There are times where I'm car camping and have a friend or my partner with me and we're just drinking beers and watching the stars. Then there's time where I go out alone and I write and I work on just projects where I need intense focus. And then, day to day, going out down a river or up on a mesa and walking around without any purpose and just spending the time out, spending the time in nature.
Mm.
That's my, people's end of the day is Netflix or, having people over for dinner. I go and make sure I spend time with nature every day, no matter how busy it is.
Mm. Mm. You said you grew up in the Mojave Desert. Does that mean you grew up in Southern California?
Southern California, on the edge of the Mojave Desert and the great inland empire of developed suburbia.
It's an incredible name, the Inland Empire. Uh,
Yes.
did you grow up in suburbia, or did you have a more direct relationship to nature growing up?
I was very much in suburbia, although I feel extremely lucky that a mile from my parents' house, there was this small sort of urban wilderness area with lots of trails and rolling hills and riparian nooks within these mini canyons. And, at a young age, when I was 9, I decided that I wanted to try running and I fell in love with it. And my parents supported this pursuit. And, by the time I was 12, they were letting me just like take off and run through the hills alone. And so even though I had this very conventional suburban upbringing, which I increasingly was not fond of, I wanted to be out in wild places, and both books and my time in this small wilderness area where I could also see the mountains looming above the city. Those really opened up my eyes to what was possible. And I really kind of became consumed by this idea of being out in nature as much as possible. Even in high school, I would sleep outside in the backyard.
Hmm.
I felt better when I was out. It felt more natural. I didn't really care about my room. I wasn't one of those kids who was just like, lock me away in my room. It was like, leave me outside.
Don't make me come inside.
Don't make me come inside. Don't make me wash the sand from the beach off my feet. I want to feel it I want to feel it while I'm sleeping. I was that kid.
Huh. Did you have a gateway into this level of nature connection? Was there a person or an experience, or was it your family, or did you really just develop this yourself?
I think a little bit of all of the above. We weren't the kind of family, we didn't go camping or backpacking. I went to summer camp with friends. So that wasn't the gateway. My parents really encouraged us into playing outside and endurance sports. We all ran track, and my brother was on swim team. So we were always, playing sports outside and playing with our friends. But really, the nature connection, like I said, was really gleaned through these experiences where I was moving through this, to me, wild place, and then going home and, reading like books that just opened my eyes to all these explorers and adventures, whether it was John Muir or Robinson Crusoe. And I just, my grandparents lived near the coast, or at the coast, and I would also get out into the ocean, or my siblings were playing with the sandcastle and the toys. I was way out in the waves and watching the fish and having dolphins circle me. And, it just made me understand that suburbia was not it. There is a
Mm.
wilder world. The real world is out there, and I'm going there as soon as I can.
Mm. There's so many directions I want to take this. So you became a trail runner like by your 12th birthday? You were already running trails?
Yeah, I ran my first race when I was 9 with my mom.
What?
Um, yeah, and she, I was so nervous, but then halfway through, she was slowing down. She's like, go on without me. And so I took off, and, I really feel like that was the kind of the olive branch of like independence. Like, you can do these things on your own. It's going to be
Mm.
okay. Your feet can carry you. And that, my mom really did, open that door for me, or allow me to open that door for myself, give me
Mm-hmm.
permission to go there.
Did you have a traditional school K through 12 experience and go straight into college like most other kids?
Yeah. Traditional public school, ran track, received a track scholarship, and that allowed me, my parents, kind of our deal was you're going to community college, and at home, or if you get a scholarship, you can go away. And I earned a scholarship and was able to go to school down in San Diego County, which put me closer to the coast and opportunities to be closer to the sea and other natural areas, which I loved.
What did you study?
I studied literature and writing.
So you already knew that you were interested in writing.
Yeah, I knew in kindergarten.
Oh.
And so that was like sort of always a silly thing. Silly is not the right word, but I'd be out running, and my grandma would ride her bike with me sometimes. And, I'd tell her, oh, I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to travel the world and go on these adventures, and I'll live, in the beach in the winter and the mountains in the summer. And she's like, that's great. But she's like, but what are you going to really do for work? And I was like, no, that's what I'm going to really do.
No,
And I
Grandma, I'm
can't
serious.
I'm serious. And I can't for the life of me, like looking back now. I mean, I don't feel like I followed that dream. I just wonder, how did I know?
Hmm. Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were a few of the books that pushed you in the direction of literature and writing? You mentioned John Muir or Robinson Crusoe. Were there any other specific books that stand out as just like game changers for you in your young adulthood?
It sounds silly, but Little House on the Prairie was like when I
It's a
was
classic
younger.
for a reason.
Classic, yeah. And this family living, with nature, trying to figure it out. Of course, now as an adult, I can see that this is also like a settler colonial family trying to take over indigenous land. But when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, they like live outside. They have to build this
Mm-hmm.
house. And I thought that was amazing. And as I got older, I fell in love with Jack Kerouac and more controversial forms of literature that where people were pushing outside, specifically the Dharma bums. That
Ah,
book really
yes.
captured my heart, and it's probably still the foundational book for me. If someone asks,
Mm,
what was the inspiration, that book's always there with me.
yeah. I'm right there with you, Morgan. That was a way more significant book for me than On the Road or anything else that you
Oh
wrote.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, where did life take you after college?
Well, so after college, I was planning to become a teacher, and I was signed up for a teaching program, and a professor who was going to sign off on it told me, I don't think you should do this. And I was like, what else am I going to do? He's like, I don't know, I have this feeling you need to go live your life and go have some adventures and maybe write about them. And I kind of looked at him in horror, because it was like, well, one, how do you know that's what I want to do? And two, like, how am I going to stay alive? But I ended up listening to him and walking out of my like planning meeting for the school year and going straight to the beach and getting on my boogie board and doing some thinking. And so I just worked at a running store and I ran races for cash. So I ran marathons, I ran track races in Tijuana, Mexico. I ended up becoming a certified yoga teacher to pick up some extra cash. So the dirtbag life was sort of born immediately. I was living in people's garages. People would take me in, and yeah.
I'm amazed that even back then that you could make enough money running to sustain yourself, even if you're living super cheap. Like, how did the economics line up for you in those years?
I mean, it wasn't great. Yeah. I mean, working at the running shoe store part time really helped. Um, Thankfully, there was, an older gentleman at the running team that I was a part of who wanted company, and so he allowed me and my boyfriend at the time to live with him for free, and we helped him with
Mm,
chores and cooked
mm-hmm,
for him, and so really it was supported by the fact that we didn't have to pay rent.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, somebody sold me their car for like, $800, like just living cheap.
Have you ever had a normal full-time job, Morgan?
Sort of. So, during that time, there was a professional triathlete who approached me and she said, hey, you're probably not going to want to just like work on your feet or maybe even run forever. You should probably, try and find some other ways to build your resume. There's this woman who has a marketing firm. I could put a word in for you, and maybe you could pick up some side work for her and, get off your feet so you can race better. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. And so I go and have an interview with this woman, and she asked me, oh man, if she ever hears this, she's going to laugh. If I know how to write a press release and if I'd want to start with that. And I had no idea how to write a press release, but I wanted this job where it was like 15 hours a week. The pay was pretty good. I knew I could quit the running store if I took this job. And I said, yes. And she's like, great. So can you write, let's go for it. This will be your test job. I'll pay you, but write this press release for this professional athlete by, tomorrow afternoon. So I go home and I just start doing research of what the hell, you do for a press release, write it, turn it in. She's like, you've got the job. So suddenly I'm working in marketing and PR for endurance sports and fitness brands.
All right. And you're working about 15 hours a week.
15 hours a week. But after a, kind of a test period, she, I proved that I had the chops and asked me if I wanted to co-manage one of her accounts. I said yes. And by co-manage the accounts, it was like, okay, you're going to lead the brand creation and website copy and instruction manual writing for this new product coming out. And I was like, wow, I'm way in over my head. But again, I can go to the beach and work on it. I can stay home. I can go run in the hills whenever I want. I just have to get it done. I'll figure it out.
Hmm. How old are you at this point, more or less?
23.
Oh, and I imagine you're earning a lot more money than you ever had.
Yeah, like finally, like a sustainable, yeah, like, I know where my next paycheck's coming from. Like, sigh of relief. And working at the running store was really, and running all those races to make money was taxing.
Yeah.
I was getting more rest. I was just feeling better. That was a huge trade-off as well.
Hmm. And can you paint a picture of your trajectory of your work or career kind of from that point up through today? I know that's kind of a big ask, but how has it evolved? How have you earned your keep? Was that your moment of being the most conventional, like in a normal job, and then it broke into a million little pieces?
Yeah, so I actually stayed with the company for 7 years. I took on more and more accounts. I was also bringing in new clients. And so I had I was able to like split, the income from each account with my boss, which was not the norm for the other employees. And I eventually was the vice president of the company. And so I was making good money. I was, networking. I was going to conferences. I was sitting in these corporate business meetings where I'd think to myself, like, if only these people knew that like this little dirtbag kid is like sneaking into the meetings, and then they'd like ask me for my input. And I'm like, oh shit, they actually care what I have to say. So there was always just this dichotomy that I was like doing a real job, but also like I was in a disguise. But having that job allowed me to move from San Diego to Mammoth Lakes, California in the Eastern Sierra, because I worked remotely. And which was a dream come true. And, all that time I had kept running. So I also started training with a professional track team in Mammoth Lakes. And so I was kind of living a conventional but unconventional life where like, yeah, I'm running with Olympic athletes and professionals, and I'm got this professional career that I can manage at the same time and live in the mountains and spend my free time in the wilderness. It was what I thought at the time. I was like, this is my dream. But the more time
very dreamy. Yeah.
It was. And it was, and I was making good money, but there was a hitch in the system. And the more time I spent in the mountains and in the Great Basin and in Death Valley and in the Owens Valley, the more I wanted to be out. And when I was out in nature, whether it was backpacking or camping or just on an afternoon walk, I knew deep down that that was what I wanted for my life, that I wanted more time and even more freedom to be in the backcountry. I didn't want to be chasing times around a track. I didn't want to be sitting in a corporate business meeting. I wanted to be writing, and I wanted to be out, that there was so much more of the world I wanted to see. And so initially, I just started finding ways to, I would kind of work double time. So I would have this secret free time where I would go out and I wouldn't tell my coach or my boss. I would just get an insane amount of work done, do a really good job. They'd be happy and they'd just kind of leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be out in the backcountry. I'd be ice skating on an alpine lake. I'd be backpacking. I'd be camped in Death Valley. Nobody would know.
So you're sneaking away while you still have this somewhat normal full-time corporate job income, but you're spending increasing amounts of time like genuinely being in the backcountry, in wilderness. And the Eastern Sierra is like the best place to be headquartered to do those kinds of adventures. I know of
Absolutely.
no better place. Yeah.
It was incredible, and even though it was like, I'm not really a sneaky person, it's just what I had to do. And honestly, I was still an independent contractor, even though I had this job, and it was like, yeah, this is my job. I don't get health insurance. This is my job benefit. That's how I saw it. Like, if I can get it done, I had a sign above my computer. It said, get shit done, go have fun. And so I maximize those
Yeah.
benefits.
So if my math is correct, if you did this for 7 years, then sometime around age 30, you stopped doing this job.
Yes.
What happened?
Well, a series of events where I can say that the wild got into my head and my heart, and I finally did what was right. I had been married during that time, and that relationship was imploding my because of alcoholism and abuse. And I finally decided that was not what I wanted for my life any longer. And so I left Mammoth, I left the team, I left my Jeep unannounced, and I took off, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had a Jeep and my backpacking gear, and I was going to figure it out in the desert. That was kind of the only decided factor, and I was going to keep doing my job because it was remote. But in that process, I also had begun dabbling in freelance writing. I realized that I understood the back end of that industry because of my time in the marketing firm. And
Mm,
so within a couple of months of leaving, I also quit my job and decided to just full-time freelance, which was really daunting because I lost all my money in the divorce process
mm,
and was not making a ton of income freelancing, but I was realizing I needed very little to survive, and that, if you're going to make a change, go all the way. And so I'd rather fully try and build my life up in the direction I wanted than try and, straddle all these worlds and commitments like I was doing before.
mm. And is this the beginning of the modern phase of your life that you've been living for 7 or 8 years?
Yes.
And where have you been living? Have you had a home? When you left Mammoth, did you also leave the stability of a single place and become more of a nomad?
100%. Yeah, I was, renting this old rickety little cabin in Mammoth, and suddenly I'm living full time in the back of a Jeep where the seats have been ripped out, and there's a wooden platform um, just for increased storage. And I put a dog bed on it and lived on it, and pretty much traveled wherever I either found a story assignment or had a friend or met a friend. Um, and so 2017, I was completely untethered. I was just out, and that brought me all over the Four Corners region, Colorado. I ran races in Vermont, and then drove across the country with someone I had just met, and just things like that.
Hmm. Was this your peak dirtbag trail runner phase?
Yeah, absolutely. I ended up by that summer, I ended up in Silverton, Colorado during the Hard Rock 100, which is when trail runners from all over the country gather in Silverton for the summer. It's like just like a dirtbag runner circus. And so much of the year I had spent a lot of time alone, mostly in Bears Ears, working on reporting and a hiking guidebook out in remote parts of the desert. But for that summer, I was just embraced by a community of, people who were either part-time dirtbags or taking a summer off. And it gave me a community. Yeah, it was a special little moment in time.
Hmm. And this is what gave you the experiences that you wrote about in your first book, which is titled Outlandish, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And can just describe a little bit more what's in that book and what inspired you to write it and how the publishing worked.
Yeah, so I mean the publishing work is really how it got started. The publisher approached me, which was sort of a miracle, and asked me what type of book I wanted to write.
Oh my gosh.
Um, which
Stuff
is,
of
kind of,
dreams.
it is the stuff of dreams. And like now I'm like, oh my gosh, like how do we bring back those times? That is just not how things work. But I told them that I had this sort of wild idea that, I'd been living really cheap and cobbling together these pretty unique meals from dumpsters and gas stations, but somehow eating really well, even though I was hardly making any money. And each burrito and each meal had a story, just, pretty wild stories to go with it. And so I proposed, this sort of hybrid dirtbag cookbook / essay collection with lots of photos. And they loved it. I mean, I threw it out and I'm like, there's no way they're not going to.
Hmm.
And they also made me an offer that at the time was game changing. It was like an amount of money I could certainly live off of for the year. And for context, the year I quit my marketing job and those paychecks stopped coming in, I started writing a hiking guidebook to Bears Ears National Monument, and my advance was $1,500, and that's what I lived on for half a year.
Wow.
And so now I've got, enough money to where it's like, I can make it. We're not talking like a ton of money, but with the context of that $1,500, it's like, okay, now I can eat for 12 months.
Yes. It's 5 figures, not 4 figures.
Yeah, exactly.
I loved something I discovered on your Instagram talking about the book. You said, I was filthy, flat broke, and dangerously adventurous. To fuel myself, I foraged out of dumpsters, pulled and cooked weeds off ski slopes, and sourced ingredients from gas stations. I'm most curious about the gas station ingredients. Are we talking mustard packets or something more elaborate?
Yeah, condiment packets. You can get tortillas and beans, and you'd be surprised. I started to keep track of which gas stations had, potatoes and peppers. But then I'd use things like nacho cheese sauce. I mean, it was definitely the most unglamorous period of eating in my life. I was raised vegetarian and vegan. I've always been a really healthy eater. But I realized that the most important thing during that period was just finding a way to fuel on a budget and make sure I was eating enough. And so that's what I did.
And was it always in the context of a burrito?
No, but that was definitely a common thread because it's just an easy way when you don't have like plates and a dishwasher. You just put it in a tortilla. You either just eat it as you go or while you drive or put it in your backpack. Yeah. It's still, I tried sandwiches once and like a mouse got in my Jeep and ate through the bag. And to me, that was the sign. It was like, no, it's burritos.
Thank you, mouse, for your lesson.
Yeah.
In a more recent post on your Substack, you talked about many of the ways that you make money today, and I counted the following: promoting gear, freelance writing, public speaking, the teaching of writing, like writing workshops, and occasional house cleaning also.
Yeah.
What else have you done for money during this period of being on the road for the past 7 or so years?
I have marked trail race courses. That was, so like these 100-mile races, and they'll send you out with a backpack full of flags, and you'll mark like 20 miles of the course, and then you'll sweep 20 miles of the course. I once got paid to camp in a field of cows that were crying all night because they had been separated from their calves. And I was just simply there to keep other people from camping on it before a race. And another race paid me to camp on the course in a cave to make sure no one took the spot. Someone once paid to use my Jeep, which was just like falling apart. And so like mid-project they were using it for, I had to drive it to a remote town to like fix a tire issue. I've had to do photo shoots all over the country, and some of the freelance writing assignments have also sent me all over the world. I once had to go to Tahiti and Patagonia, or in the opposite order, back to back, in a 3-week period. I ran the Boston Marathon. I got paid to do that.
Cool.
With 3 weeks notice. So I had not been training. I had been mostly hunkered in my Jeep for the winter. And so I kind of had 3 weeks to convince my legs they could run a marathon.
Wow. So a lot of this sounds like it comes from you having positive relationships with race organizers and race directors. Is freelance writing your main income in recent years?
Yeah. So I was going to say that there was the abrupt shift probably after the pandemic really shifted things, and I shifted directions. Before that I was mostly writing about running and outdoor adventure and food and those types of things. And then I started to get really into Southwest history and started working on my most recent book, Path of Light, and freelancing, doing environmental journalism. And that is fully where things have shifted ever since.
Yeah. When I discovered your writing online, that it seems like you'd been doing that forever, because you write really eloquently about conservation issues and history and people of the Southwest. What was the inspiration for Path of Light? And maybe just talk briefly about the subject matter.
Yeah, so Path of Light is a book where I retraced a series of historic expeditions from 100 years ago throughout Glen Canyon and the Four Corners region. And that idea came to me while I was living in my Jeep one winter out in the desert. And I was reading these history books, to gain some sense of context, like who are the other people, who weren't from this area, who were crazy enough to spend time here like me. That was kind of my question. I was also learning about the indigenous people who had always called these areas home and the generations of settlers, but I also wanted to know who else came here on a whim. And one of these people was Charles Bernheimer, a wealthy businessman from Manhattan who started doing these expeditions every year during the 1920s. And he would hire the region's best guides and indigenous guides and cowboys and put together these incredible trips. And as I would read about them, I was like, wait, I'm camped where they're camped, or, I hiked there yesterday. And so I was sort of intrigued that his journeys, more than the others, really paralleled a lot of my explorations. And I did some sleuthing, and I was able to contact some descendants of his expeditions, great-great-grandchildren of guides or archaeologists who did overlapping studies of the areas that him and his team explored. And I just started getting really into it. I mean, at first there was no destination in mind. It was just, while living alone, this was the adventure I was on. Instead of training for a race, I was just like, well, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to read this journal and then do this research afterwards so I understand where the hell I was and who's been there before. And I started writing articles about it for a regional magazine that no longer exists, and quickly sort of gaining a following and people really encouraging me to write more stories, including older historians from the region, and surprisingly, a lot of older white men who, as a cohort, they can sometimes be a little territorial and crusty about these things, especially newcomers, especially a young woman. And yet these guys were like, yes, this is what we need. We need different perspectives. We need new generation. How can we support you? And they sort of kind of stepped in like my Wizard of Oz team of the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, and started joining me on these trips. And it consumed my life, and I started realizing, this is a book. This is I've been writing a book without realizing it. So that's where Path of Light went.
I want to talk a little bit more about money, but then circle back to your sense of purpose, because I'm picking up on this. Did you receive a nice advance for that book too? Have you been able to live off? No. Okay.
Nope. I would say that the advance for that book paid about the same as a magazine article. But the opportunity to work with an independent publisher with such a credible and amazing community of authors was what I was after. And, this book, Path of Light, is so rooted in the Southwest. I knew I really needed to have a publisher that understood this area and was sensitive to its complicated history. It was, thinking about it now, maybe it would have been possible, but I felt pretty certain that this wasn't a book I would want a New York publisher to deal with. I wanted this to be a book for people in the Southwest.
So that means,
and that really honored it.
Yeah.
Not much money. Yeah. But that came to fruition, and I really feel good about that, this wasn't altered to reach a mass audience. This is a book born from the desert, and this is a book that's for the desert.
Okay, never mind. We're going to talk about purpose now, Morgan, and I'll circle back to money. It sounds like you have always been really clear about what's important to you, like from a young age, being out in nature, moving through wild places, literally running through them. You figured out you want to do writing. It sounds like you had this kind of interesting detour into a slightly more conventional life with the marketing and publicity work. But then you found your way back to writing, and specifically writing about places and adventures and being thrifty. And I guess I'm curious to know, have there ever been periods in your life where you feel a bit more directionless and a bit lost, not in the glorious, lost in the wilderness that you like to put yourself into, but like just not sure what you're doing or why you're doing it anymore?
Yes, 100%. Especially, when I was working on Outlandish, I was just having most of the time I was just having so much fun, and I was, 30, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like one thing leads to another, and it was just like going for the wild ride. But then I started to pretty much get exhausted by the physical demands of what I was doing, and that's where that slower winter and learning about the expeditions came in. But surprisingly, even though Path of Light gave me such incredible direction by following those expeditions and the amazing people that came into my life, I also felt so distanced from any semblance of, I guess, a normal life. I felt really disconnected. Like I know this is my path and my pursuit, but like, how does this connect to like anything but being a hermit in the desert? And so I felt
Mm,
really lost. Like, where does this go from here? I'm not making enough money to change anything about my life. I'm really happy in the desert, but that also makes me a freak. And, I don't have these normal things where I'm meeting coworkers for drinks on the weekend. I'm just like way out in this place that nobody's ever heard of. So it was sort of like this really introspective and existential time where I both loved what I was doing, but I was terrified by it.
and how does the story end, or how does it continue? I'm very curious. You have me
Well,
hooked.
yeah, I mean, there was this quote from one of the explorers, John Wetherill, who is in the book. And in the 1920s, he says, if I'm not going to get it right, but at first you're fascinated with the desert and you want to spend all your time there. Then the desert terrifies you. You realize it could kill you. And then you start to realize that the desert takes care of you and that you're home. And I definitely went through that whole process in that with the desert. And, toward the end of writing the book, went through a bunch of other, I went through a nasty breakup and all of these things that further, if it's even possible to further sever me from a traditional life, it happened. And it was just kind of like, okay, here I am, like in the desert. I lost my uncle who was really close to me and one of my biggest supporters. And like, I'm just really out here. I better just start living like my life is out here and like start paying attention to what I need versus like trying to like again straddle two different worlds. So I made lots of time for people who also love spending time in the desert, and these were mostly older retired folks in their 60s and 70s, and I made sure to go backpacking with them and hang out with them whenever possible, and seek out community within these remote spaces whenever I could. And when I opened myself up to that, I started actually having less solitary time and more time around other people, which was really meaningful because I definitely needed that. You can spend too much time alone, even though I knew in the desert I wasn't alone, which is what made me, it's kind of weird that time in the desert made me realize I needed to be in community more because I knew the plants were alive. I knew I wasn't alone. There was wildlife around me all the time. And I needed to open myself up to other people, safe people, healthy people to be around. And as I did that, I realized, maybe I don't want to spend the whole summer alone in Bears Ears. And so I decided to drive, to a small rural town in Canyon Country where there's a good pizza shop and take care of myself and rent a small cabin for 3 nights and have some shelter and just, treat myself, big, big aspirations I had. Um, and in that process, I instantly that night met this man named Aaron, who's now my partner. And he asked me if I wanted to go hiking with him. And we haven't stopped walking together ever since. My life has truly changed, but the change came from the desert, reminding me that community and opening myself up to the creatures and people and habitat I want to be surrounded by, that is vital to sustaining my life in the desert. It can't just be me in the desert.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that when you realized it can't just be you, then the natural community there were these older sounds like mostly retired men who were also
And
in love
women.
with, and women, okay,
Yeah.
who were in love with the desert and who would be very happy to share time with you, a woman in her 30s, and that sort of eventually led you back to, I guess, what most people assume one in their 30s should be doing, which is like looking for someone else around to kind of your same age bracket. Uh, I This leads me to this bigger question, Morgan. Like, in what ways do you feel like you don't fit into society, into like the normal realm of human interaction and what's expected of you and what your age cohort does? And I'm curious how durable this difference is. How long have you felt different? Just go for it.
I mean, I think from this conversation, it's pretty clear that I've always felt different, and I've always felt strongly about following my dharma, my path, if you will, and really listening to my instincts. And sometimes my instincts have led me to some dangerous places, but I've learned a lot from those experiences. I've never really school was really hard because they sort of make you follow a conventional path, and
Yeah.
I felt a lot of friction there. But really, ever since I left college, there has been no conventional path, and it's been this confluence of feeling really great because I know this is what I need to do, and really hard because society does not, there is not the same support for choosing different. There's no guidebook, there is no trail. It is wilderness exploration for life, as well as being in the backcountry. And so that comes with the same, like, oh fuck, what am I doing? Like those ups and downs and fears. And is there going to be water that you feel in the desert? I feel this in my day-to-day life too. And it has definitely taken some time and maturity. I would say, especially the last 3 years, I've gotten better at making peace with that and sort of recognizing that these challenges and things that are scary about it are not signs that this is something wrong. It's just the way it is. These are the challenges and hurdles of the life that I'm living. And I'm actually really well adapted at navigating them in the way that I'm not so good at navigating like a busy parking lot or traffic or flashing lights and loud noises of a city or places where it costs lots of money as an entrance fee, or wearing certain clothes for status, or sitting in corporate meetings. Like I just, I think back to that 20-year-old sitting in the meeting, like, do they know who's in this meeting? And that's because like I didn't belong there. I mean, I'm sure I had the ideas and the intellect to hold my own, but that's not where I belong. So yeah, I just, and when I'm out in nature, all of that goes away and I'm not thinking about where I don't fit in. I'm listening to the world around me. I'm a part of something. That all slips away.
Beautifully said. When you have moments of struggle, when it's not that easy to keep living this way, or when you start to second guess yourself, have you noticed a pattern as to when that happens, or when you feel the most down about trying to live so differently?
I mean, it definitely follows patterns of stress. If I get stressed in one area of my life, it can, create a deck of cards effect, and suddenly I'm stressing about more things than usual. It also can be stressful if I hit a hiccup with a project or a rejection, and again, I'm getting better with dealing with this as I look at my last 8 years of life and realize that, no one stumbling block ruins the whole thing. There's going to be ups and downs. There's still this part of me that like one day it's just going to end and you're not going to have any writing assignments. You're not going to have any work. And then what are you going to do? But I'm learning to trust that that's not going to happen. I'm have pretty strong capability of finding work and ways to keep myself busy. And when I don't have work, I'm really good at going into the backcountry and not spending money. I guess the doubts start to creep in is how long am I going to be able to keep this up? But then again, I think about anyone who's in a career and the world we're living in now, and nobody really knows how long they're going to be able to keep their job up. And some people have really fabulous retirement plans, but a lot of people don't. And so I think I'm just living like face to face with these uncertainties that affect so many people. I'm just not stuffing them down. I'm in it. I'm in that
Mm-hmm.
terrain all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I try and tell myself, I mean, that the best I can, that this is how I prepare. It's not, preparing for the future isn't something where I set things up and I have it figured out. It's that adaptability, that dance that I'm going to carry with me
Mm.
into whatever's ahead.
Uh, a good friend of mine who lives in Western Colorado took me backpacking a few springs ago in an area you might be familiar with, the Water Pocket Fold.
Mm-hmm.
And we there was no running water at that time,
Yeah.
and so we were getting water out of just little basins, out of little holes in the ground, and hopefully it wasn't like too stinky, and would
Yeah.
filter it twice. And I was genuinely nervous on that trip because I've never relied on finding water in that way,
Yeah.
and we would run out of water, and the sun would still be pretty high, and he'd say, "Don't worry, we're gonna find some," and we did. There was always water, but there were these periods where I was like, I don't want to be dying of dehydration out here,
Yeah.
and I imagine that might be what it's like being a freelance writer. Like
Yes.
you're wandering through the sandstone, you've run out of water, and you're like, I'm pretty confident that there's going to be a little divot full of water around the next corner, but I don't know for sure. Depends on many factors. Uh, this is me returning to the subject of money, and I'm curious of how you conceive of like the sustainable path forward with being able to fund your life, and how you think about it on both sides of the equation of earning money and spending money, and yeah, how you feel confident about the future for yourself.
I mean, I guess I'm confident in my ability to take care of myself, and so much of that has been um, honed and sharpened living out in the desert, where I realized that the most important thing in life is finding that next pothole of water. I mean, that never goes away. I'm always a little paranoid about water, but I'm also very trusting in finding it. And so when I start thinking about things like money, it's like, yeah, but like if the economy collapses, I know where the potholes are. Like, so there is the foundational level where I'm like, that's the bare minimum. And I know I can do it. I need to take care of myself. But it is really daunting in the financial realm, and, the life I'm living. I think you were saying this before the interview. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely not a phase, which I always knew. But now I'm like old enough at age 38 where I'm like, this is my life.
Mm.
All right. So we're on this ride. This is what it is. I'm not going to just, well, that was nice and fun. Now I'm going to go get a corporate job. I mean, at this point, I'm too far in. That will kill
Mm.
me.
Mm. Mm.
I spend 2 days in, a city like Tucson, and I'm completely rattled and overwhelmed and need to go out to the desert to recalibrate. I'm just, that's not my path in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so to return to your question, yeah, there is no certainty. And as I'm sure you're well aware, the political and economic climate in the United States adds another layer to this uncertainty. Whereas if I was dealing with these things pre-2020, it would be challenging, but I had a pretty clear vision of what could be done. And now even some of the most simple rudimentary ways to kind of build a dirt bag future, even like a retirement shack, are completely out of my league and many Americans' league.
Are you talking about the cost of housing or something else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's, directly affected by political decisions and the state of the economy and inflation, and things that are just beyond my control.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it comes back to that sense of like, no matter how hard I work or how, I'm incredibly thrifty. I have, especially when I first moved into my Jeep and I had no money. I had to find a way to live without money. And that has carried forward. And so, so much of my financial plan is, how little money can I spend?
Mm-hmm.
But that only works to a point as the cost of goods and housing continue to skyrocket.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to live like this because you have any sort of like hidden security net, like family money or like your partner making this possible? Or is this all a life that you could continue to lead if there was no one else, no family, no nothing else to fall back on?
I mean, it's just me. Yeah, this is and I say it with a caveat that like life is never just you. I mean,
Yeah.
if everything were to collapse, I know my parents would let me come home and stay with them and I wouldn't starve, but I have proven whether it's eating out of dumpsters or hiding in cans, that's not what I want to do with my life. But my parents do love me and would take me in, and I have my partner, Aaron. He works for a local outfitter and cafe and also cleans houses. So we both have very blue collar incomes and we share the load of what our expenses are. So we support each other, but financially we're both completely independent in the same space. So yeah, it's if everyone goes away, this is how I'm taking care of
Mm-hmm.
myself. Yeah. But to me, the having the emotional support, the people who are understanding of how I'm living. And I would say primarily, Aaron, who also feels so much more at home in nature and lives a very simple, frugal life and works really hard, but lives for that time outdoors, not for the work we're doing. That's what's really made this sustainable for me is sharing that with someone else.
It sounds like you've done a really good job of fulfilling your own relationship with nature, doing that in relationship with someone else. What about the bigger purpose of your work, your writing, what you post online? How do you think about your kind of larger contribution to the world? I won't say like your legacy or something heavy-handed like that,
Ugh.
but to what extent do you feel this need to be a voice for something bigger than like your own relationship to nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of how much that nature and the relationship I have with it, how much it is, the bedrock of my life, I must give something back. I have to have a reciprocal relationship with it. And, at this moment in history, the natural world, the environment, public land, clean water, especially in the United States right now, is under threat. And so I have felt since, 2017 when I first moved into my Jeep that in exchange for being able to go out on the land and basically live, I need to do what I can through my writing, through speaking, through advocacy, through online presence to help protect and defend those areas. And that's been an entire, it's maybe a separate conversation about the different ways that that's possible and what that means. But at the core, that is what's guiding what I do. My living situation, everything I own can go away. My primary care is for the natural world
Hmm.
because that's what makes any of this possible, not money. Um,
Hmm.
Dirtbag rich to me is you have clean water, you have
Hmm.
clean
Mm-hmm.
air, you have healthy landscapes and ecosystems and places that are open and welcome for all people to come and benefit from and where people are respecting the wildlife and respecting the indigenous homelands. Like to me, that's the richest we all could ever aspire to be.
Hmm. Maybe we can close with a story. You've described your time in the Eastern Sierra, in the Great Basin, Canyon Country. I'm wondering if there's a moment from, doesn't even have to be recently in your life, just at any point that really like stands out to you and maybe symbolizes this relationship with nature that feels so important to you. So it could be like a beautiful moment or something you might call like transcendent, just a kind of moment that reminds you why you decide over and over again to live this way, something symbolic. Do you have a story to share?
Oh, that's That's really tough. I just, I think in the big picture, it's just all the times that I've thought I'm going out into the wilderness alone. And sometimes that's, a fun choice. And other times it's like, well, this is just where my life is. And the different ways that the natural world around me has affirmed that I'm not alone, whether it's a name carved in the wall of stone that person eventually literally becomes my friend, or a coyote walking me back to camp, or waking up and seeing mountain lion tracks around my sleeping bag, or deciding to follow the storm in a new direction and, meeting the love of my life. I think these just moments again and again where the desert has shown me you're not alone reminds me of why I need to remain committed to giving back to the desert.
Mm. Sounds like a accumulation of many small moments that
Oh yeah, I couldn't
turns
I
into
couldn't
something big.
it's just when spending so much time out, it's impossible to pick any one moment. I mean, I can't even pick any one moment from each of my, different experiences. It's
Yeah.
just, it really is, I have very few memories of, oh, I lived in this house or that house. Like, life is lived out there.
uh, Morgan, if people want to read what you write or hear what you have to say, what is the best way for them to follow you online?
I write on Substack at Wild Words about once a week when I'm not out, which that sometimes dwindles. I'm also the author of Path of Light, a walk through colliding legacies of Glen Canyon. That's through Torrey House Press, and really gets into sort of the desert as a guiding light and how those experiences retracing expeditions led me to the path I'm on now.
Morgan, it's been a pleasure. It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for the conversation.